The conference room phone would not stop ringing. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan in the parking lot of Etheria Technologies, watching the caller ID flash across my cell phone screen for the 19th time in 4 hours. It was Chad Vance, the 23-year-old nephew of our senior vice president, calling from the executive office that had belonged to me until 8 o'clock this morning. I let the call go to voicemail once again. My hands rested steadily on the steering wheel, not shaking from anger or fear, but settled into a quiet, profound calm. For 14 long years, I had built Etheria Technologies' cloud security infrastructure from absolute scratch. Every encrypted server pipeline, every automated failover protocol, every multi-tiered firewall that guarded 85 million customer records across 48 states was designed and deployed by me. My name is Damon Vance. I am 48 years old, married to my wonderful wife Claire, who is 45, and father to our 2 sharp kids, Gabe, who is 12, and Maya, who is 9. Until 4 hours ago, I held the position of Senior Director of Cloud Security at Etheria Technologies. Or at least, that was the title printed on my office door before executive leadership stripped it away to hand it to a kid who had graduated from business school 6 months prior. The voicemail notification chimed on my phone screen. I tapped to listen to the automated playback. Chad's voice crackled through the speaker, completely stripped of its usual arrogant swagger. "Damon, please, you have to answer. Everything is down. The primary server clusters, the backup pipelines, the tertiary failover nodes, nothing is responding. Corporate enterprise clients are flooding the switchboards, and we are facing massive breach penalties. We are losing over $115,000 every single minute. Please, call me back." The kid sounded like he was on the verge of tears. I locked my phone screen and placed it in my pocket. To understand how Etheria Technologies found itself hemorrhaging money while its core network burned to the ground, you have to go back 6 months. It started on a crisp autumn morning when Vice President Bradley Vance called me into his corner office, overlooking the city skyline. Bradley was 56 years old, polished, smooth-talking, and heavily invested in internal corporate politics. He poured 2 cups of black coffee and gestured for me to sit down across from his heavy mahogany desk. "Damon," Bradley had said with a warm smile, "you know I plan to retire soon. You are at the top of my list for Vice President of Technology, but I need to see your leadership in action, specifically how you mentor top talent. I am bringing on my nephew, Chad Vance, as Deputy Director of Cloud Security. He just finished his business degree at Stanford. Brilliant young mind. I want you to take him directly under your wing, Damon. Show him the architecture, teach him the operational protocols, and let him shadow your daily decisions. Consider his development the primary benchmark of your readiness for the vice president role. Under the legal doctrine of promissory estoppel, a clear and unambiguous promise made by an executive with apparent authority creates a binding commitment when relied upon in good faith." I shook Bradley's hand, fully believing that this mentorship program was the final formal stepping stone to my executive promotion. I had no idea that I was agreeing to hand my own career over on a silver platter to an incompetent relative. Chad Vance started the following Monday morning. He walked into our open-plan engineering department, wearing an expensive suit and sporting the unearned confidence of someone who had never faced consequences. He looked around the server monitoring room with mild amusement before walking straight into my office. "So, you must be Damon," Chad said, leaning casually against my doorframe without asking to sit. "My Uncle Bradley says you are the technical wizard around here. You are supposed to show me how all these cloud servers work so I can take over the big picture strategy." I looked up from my dual monitors, keeping my tone measured and professional. "Welcome aboard, Chad. We manage cloud infrastructure for medical networks, financial platforms, and retail giants. It requires strict adherence to security protocols, continuous vigilance, and deep technical precision. Let us start by going over the primary system architecture." During his first 2 weeks, I attempted to walk him through the fundamentals of our distributed cloud clusters, firewall rules, and data encryption standards. But whenever I opened terminal architecture or system flowcharts, Chad would pull out his smartphone, scrolling through social media feeds while giving half-hearted nods. When I asked him if he understood how our automated failover routines functioned, he simply waved his hand dismissively, stating that cloud providers handle everything automatically. Chad. I explained patiently, holding back a sigh. We are the cloud provider. Enterprise clients pay us to guarantee that their 85 million records remain accessible and encrypted. If our security fails, their operations freeze instantly. He just shrugged, took a sip of his coffee, and asked where the executive lunch menu was kept. By his second month as deputy director, Chad's profound lack of technical knowledge began creating real operational friction. Late one Thursday evening around 11 o'clock, my personal phone rang. It was Chad, his voice tight with panic, claiming our systems were under a foreign cyber attack because hundreds of alerts popped up across his monitor. I logged in remotely from my home office desk while Claire watched me with concern. I pulled up the primary traffic monitor and explained to Chad that those were routine diagnostic pings from regional enterprise nodes processing automated health checks. He had his console filter set to display raw diagnostic traffic instead of critical exceptions. After I walked him through changing the filter drop-down menu, he offered no apology for waking me up near midnight. By month 3, Chad's hubris turned into outright destruction of required system records. I walked into the server command center on a Tuesday afternoon to find my senior developer and second-in-command, Nora Davis, staring at her monitor in absolute horror. Nora was a brilliant 34-year-old engineer who had worked alongside me for 6 years. Someone had wiped 700 gigabytes of raw system access logs from the primary storage volume. I ran a terminal query and discovered Chad's administrator account executed the deletion script. When confronted, Chad casually admitted clearing the files because disk storage was 80% full. I sternly reminded him that under federal regulations and client contracts, we are legally required to maintain unalterable audit trails for a minimum of 7 years. I spent 7 hours alongside Nora and IT lead Gavin Ross, restoring the logs from magnetic backup tapes while Chad left for golf with his uncle. Late that evening, Nora cornered me in the break room, warning me that Chad was being positioned by Bradley to take my chair. By month 5, Bradley Vance began holding private strategy meetings regarding department restructuring without including me. Under statutory provisions like the Warner Act, formal employee notices and structural adjustments require strict compliance frameworks. Yet executive leadership treated corporate rules like personal tools. Chad started issuing directives to line engineers that openly contradicted established security protocols, such as attempting to bypass two-factor authentication for executive accounts because his uncle found login prompts annoying. Every time I corrected Chad's dangerous instructions, he would flash an arrogant grin and remind the engineering team that his uncle was reviewing the department's future leadership structure. The final trap was sprung this morning at 7:45 when an urgent, mandatory all-hands email was broadcast from the office of CEO Donald Price, calling everyone to Conference Room Alpha at 8 o'clock sharp. When I walked into the room, Vice President Bradley Vance stood at the head of the table, flanked by CEO Donald Price and a grinning Chad Vance. Bradley announced that effective immediately, 23-year-old Chad Vance was promoted to Senior Director of Cloud Security. As for me, after 14 years of dedicated service, I was laterally reassigned to compliance oversight in a basement office. Nora Davis stood up and protested passionately that Chad did not understand basic network redundancy or system logs, putting 85 million customer records at risk. Bradley snapped that the decision was final and ordered a 2-week transition phase. I looked at Bradley, Donald, and Chad's arrogant smirk. In that quiet moment, my obligation to Etheria dissolved completely. I stood up slowly from my chair, buttoned my navy suit jacket, and stepped forward. I looked across the conference table at Bradley Vance, keeping my facial expression completely unreadable and my voice steady. Actually, Vice President Vance, I said quietly, a 2-week transition period will not be necessary. Bradley frowned, his eyebrows knitting together in surprise. What do you mean, Damon? Standard corporate policy requires a complete administrative handover and system walkthrough. Under Etheria Technologies' internal corporate governance charter, I replied calmly, An employee transferred laterally to a non-technical oversight position must immediately surrender all active system administrative privileges to prevent conflicts of interest. Furthermore, over the past 6 months, Chad has attended every strategic briefing, possessed full read-write access to our system repositories, and shadowed my daily routines. As Chad himself has stated repeatedly, our cloud security infrastructure is fully automated. If he is qualified to assume the title of Senior Director of Cloud Security today, then he is already fully prepared to manage it without my hand being held. Chad sat up straight in his chair, his smirk faltering slightly for a split second before his arrogance took over again. "Yeah, Uncle Bradley," Chad chimed in, tossing his head back. "I have got the main concepts down. How hard can running a cloud network really be? Most of the automated scripts run themselves anyway." Nora Davis buried her face in her hands while Gavin Ross looked like he was about to faint. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out my heavy master access keycard, the encrypted hardware token that controlled root-level access to every primary server cluster, database vault, and security firewall in Etheria's network. I placed it gently on the center of the conference table. Next to it, I unclipped my executive security badge and placed it side by side with the keycard. "These now belong to you, Senior Director Vance," I said, addressing Chad directly with crisp, formal politeness. "Allow me to remind you of a few operational parameters. The primary database cluster on sublevel 2 requires strict environmental climate controls, maintaining temperatures between 64 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The automated intrusion detection engine processes approximately 40 diagnostic alerts per hour. 39 of those alerts are routine system telemetry, but the 40th is often an enterprise anomaly that requires manual verification within 15 minutes to maintain our client service level agreements. Additionally," I continued, speaking clearly so every engineer in the room could hear me, "our legacy enterprise client authentication pipelines are manually bridged to the main cloud framework because executive leadership deferred the upgrade budget last quarter. Those legacy bridges require careful oversight during automated maintenance routines. Encryption keys rotate automatically every 72 hours, and our off-site magnetic backups synchronize every 6 hours. During that synchronization window, primary failover loops require active monitoring." Bradley interrupted, demanding I write a comprehensive operational manual. I informed him that 14 years of comprehensive technical documentation, system schematics, and operational runbooks were already indexed in the secure central repository, to which Chad had full access for half a year. Everything he needed was fully documented. As of 8 o'clock this morning, my duties as senior director officially concluded. I picked up my leather briefcase, turned on my heel, and walked out of Conference Room Alpha. The walk through the main floor of Etheria Technologies was strangely silent, as colleagues watched in shock as news of the demotion spread. I took the elevator down to the lobby and stepped out into the parking lot. Sitting in my sedan, my personal cell phone rang. It was Nora Davis calling from her desk. She stated frantically that she and Gavin were ready to submit their formal resignations in protest. I instructed her firmly not to quit, to keep performing their daily duties strictly according to established technical protocols, and to direct Chad to the written runbooks without performing unauthorized administrative overrides. At 10 o'clock, I called my wife Claire. She was furious about the corporate nepotism and suggested consulting an employment attorney immediately. I reassured her that while Bradley Vance broke explicit promises under promissory estoppel, Chad was now holding the wheel of a complex system, and the cloud infrastructure itself would soon deliver an unalterable performance review. At 11:45 in the morning, the scheduled Tuesday routine system maintenance cycle initiated across Etheria's cloud network. This was a standardized automated process that executed every Tuesday at noon to recalibrate network load balancers, index active database records, and run diagnostic telemetry across all 85 million customer records. During routine maintenance, console displays temporarily showed hundreds of yellow diagnostic alerts as traffic rerouted through secondary buffers. However, today was Chad Vance's first official day as senior director. Sitting in my former corner office, eating an expensive takeout lunch, Chad saw 400 line items flashing across his desktop screen. Never having learned how to filter diagnostic logs during his 6 months as deputy director, he panicked, assuming the network was under an active foreign cyber attack. He sprinted out of his office into the command center, screaming that the monitoring console was compromised. Nora Davis calmly explained that it was the standard Tuesday maintenance cycle and told him to adjust his filter to display critical exceptions only. Chad refused to listen, shouting that load balancers were at 90% capacity and demanding the location of the physical server control room. Gavin Ross warned him that touching load balancer configurations while maintenance scripts were actively indexing databases would disrupt live transaction threads. Chad bellowed that in business school, when an enterprise system hangs, you execute a hard system reset to clear buffer memory. He grabbed the master access keycard and marched to sub-level 2. Nora Davis stood up from her desk, issuing an urgent legal warning that performing an ungraceful hardware power cut on active production servers, processing medical and financial data, violated federal data safety protocols, and breached our client service level agreements, corrupting active database headers. Chad ignored her completely. In the primary power distribution room on sublevel 2, Chad unlocked the industrial breaker panel. He grabbed the heavy mechanical switch for Master Power Array 1 and slammed it downward. A deafening electrical clunk echoed through the concrete room as Primary Server Array 1 died instantly, severing live data threads mid-write. Panicking further when he saw the lights go dark, Chad grabbed Master Power Array 2 and Master Power Array 3, slamming both mechanical breakers down in rapid succession. Within 4 seconds, Chad Vance physically severed total electrical power to Etheria Technologies' entire cloud infrastructure. Every primary server, secondary failover cluster, and tertiary storage vault died instantly. 85 million customer records across 48 states vanished from the internet. Upstairs in the command center, every monitor screen went solid pitch black. The silence that followed was absolute. Across the country, the catastrophic consequences of Chad Vance's unthinkable actions manifested instantly. In major medical networks in Ohio and Pennsylvania, emergency room doctors pulled up patient profiles to check critical drug allergies and blood types prior to emergency surgeries, only to be met with blank red timeout screens. In national financial institutions in New York and Charlotte, electronic payment processing gateways froze mid-transaction, locking millions of retail customers out of their accounts. E-commerce platforms processing millions of dollars in hourly sales watched their checkout portals collapse, displaying severe server connection errors to frustrated shoppers worldwide. Inside Etheria Technologies' executive suites, absolute panic erupted within 3 minutes of the power cut. Every phone line on the corporate switchboard began ringing simultaneously. Automated enterprise breach notifications flooded executive email inboxes. Under Etheria's enterprise client contracts, strict service-level agreement penalty clauses stipulated that any unannounced network downtime exceeding 5 minutes triggered liquidated damages of $25,000 per minute for prime financial clients, escalating to $50,000 per minute if core database services remained unrestored after 30 minutes. Total downtime losses rapidly exceeded $115,000 per minute, triggering severe SLA breach penalties. CO Donald Price, interrupted mid-meeting by automated breach alerts, rushed into the technology division demanding Damon Vance. When his assistant informed him that Vice President Bradley Vance had demoted Damon at 8 o'clock, to put his nephew Chad in charge, Donald stormed into the command center. He found Chad standing near the elevator, disheveled and wide-eyed with terror. When Donald demanded to know why the national network was offline, Chad stammered that he saw hundreds of red error messages and went down to sublevel 2 to flip the main circuit breakers for a quick hardware reboot. Donald grabbed Chad by his lapels in sheer disbelief, screaming at him for executing an ungraceful hard crash on 85 million live records. Nora Davis stepped forward and explained the technical catastrophe. Hard power loss prevented memory cache flushing, corrupting master boot sectors, fracturing database headers, and desynchronizing encryption tables. Gavin Ross added that a standard software reboot was impossible because primary boot volumes were corrupted. The only way to restore 85 million records was a manual disaster recovery cold start from offline vault backups using root administrator security credentials, which only Damon Vance possessed. Donald Price turned around and glared viciously at Vice President Bradley Vance, shouting that his nepotism and operational negligence was costing the company $115,000 per minute and facing over $26 million in total financial losses and SLA breach penalties, constituting a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty to corporate shareholders. Donald barked at Bradley to get Damon Vance on the phone immediately. Down in the parking lot, I was sitting calmly in my sedan, drinking a bottle of water and watching the clock on my dashboard. The time was precisely 12:42 in the afternoon. My personal cell phone began vibrating furiously with the incoming private line of CEO Donald Price. I let it vibrate for 4 full cycles before picking up the phone and pressing the speaker button. "This is Damon Vance," I said smoothly. Donald Price's voice came screaming through the phone speaker, accompanied by chaotic alarm tones. "Damon, we have an absolute catastrophe. The entire cloud network is dark. Hospitals, banks, retail clients are screaming. We are losing millions of dollars by the minute. I need you to get back into the building right now and fix this." I leaned back against my headrest and replied with cold, professional calm. I reminded CEO Price that per Bradley Vance's morning declaration, I was no longer Senior Director of Cloud Security, but a compliance oversight officer stripped of technical administrative credentials. When Donald yelled that Chad had physically pulled the power breakers and corrupted the primary boot architecture, I allowed a hint of cool amusement to touch my voice. Donald demanded I return under executive order. I firmly responded that a compliance officer cannot execute high-level system engineering without administrator credentials and a formal mandate. Furthermore, under the legal doctrine of promissory estoppel, I had relied in good faith on Bradley Vance's clear executive promises regarding my career progression, only to suffer an arbitrary demotion. If I stepped onto that server floor without explicit legal authorization, any technical complications could be wrongfully attributed to me. Donald Price was panting over the phone, asking what I required. I sat up straight in my car, my voice turning like polished steel, and laid out 5 non-negotiable terms, executed in writing and signed digitally by Donald Price and the board of directors before I opened my car door. First, immediate and total reinstatement to my role as Senior Director of Cloud Security, with an expanded executive mandate that includes strategic advisory oversight on all corporate technology decisions. Second, a 50% increase in my base executive compensation, backed by a guaranteed 3-year employment contract that stipulates termination can only occur for proven gross criminal negligence. Third, the immediate termination of Chad Vance for gross operational negligence, with cause, barring him from holding any position within Etheria Technologies permanently. Fourth, an immediate formal board of directors investigation into Vice President Bradley Vance for breach of fiduciary duty, investigating his improper use of executive authority to promote an unqualified family member at the expense of shareholder value. Fifth, the immediate implementation of a binding corporate governance policy mandating that any future executive family hires require independent technical competency testing and unanimous board of directors approval. When Donald Price sputtered that drafting such a contract would take hours, I coolly reminded him that at $115,000 per minute in downtime losses and SLA breach penalties, every 15 minutes your lawyer's deliberate costs Etheria another $1.7 million. I will be waiting right here in my car. I tapped the screen and ended the call. I laid my cell phone back down on the passenger seat and looked out the windshield at the glass facade of Etheria Technologies headquarters. Inside my car, the atmosphere was quiet and composed. Outside, I could see corporate executives rushing past the lobby windows in a visible state of terror, holding phones to their ears and waving arms frantically. 9 minutes later, my cell phone chimed with a high-priority encrypted email notification. It was an official document sent directly from Etheria Technologies' General Counsel, bearing the digital signatures of CEO Donald Price and Corporate Board Chairperson Sylvia Rothman. I opened the attached PDF document and read through the legal clauses with meticulous care. The document executed every single one of my 5 demands down to the exact letter. It formally reinstated me as Senior Director of Cloud Security, with expanded Strategic Technology Advisory Authority. It established my 50% base salary increase, secured my guaranteed 3-year contract, confirmed the immediate termination of Chad Vance for gross negligence with cause, mandated an immediate Board of Directors investigation into Vice President Bradley Vance for breach of fiduciary duty, and established the binding family hiring governance policy. Furthermore, it granted me full emergency administrative power to take whatever technical measures were necessary to restore corporate infrastructure. I executed my digital signature on the document, transmitted the verified file back to General Counsel, picked up my leather briefcase, and stepped out of my sedan. The walk back into Etheria Technologies headquarters felt entirely different from my exit 4 hours earlier. As I stepped through the sliding glass doors of the lobby, security guards and corporate staff stood back, watching me with expressions of profound respect and relief. I took the executive elevator straight down to sublevel 2. When the elevator doors opened on the server floor, I was met by Nora Davis and Gavin Ross, who were standing outside the server vault alongside CEO Donald Price. Donald looked haggard, his tie undone and sweat glistening on his forehead. Next to him stood Vice President Bradley Vance, looking utterly crushed and silent. Chad Vance was sitting on a plastic chair in the corner of the hallway, staring at the floor in absolute disgrace. Damon, Donald Price rushed forward, holding out his hand. The contract is executed. You have full root administrator authority. Please, save our infrastructure. I ignored Bradley Vance and Chad Vance completely, stepping past them as if they were invisible. I walked straight up to Nora and Gavin. Nora, Gavin, report status, I commanded crisply. Damon, Nora said, her eyes shining with relief. Primary master power arrays 1, 2, and 3 are physically re-engaged, but primary storage volumes are locked in corrupted boot states. Secondary failover arrays are unresponsive due to desynchronized encryption key tables. The hardware is sound, but the software boot sectors are completely fractured. Understood, I said calmly. Gavin, verified that environmental cooling in the server vault is locked at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Nora, retrieve the offline magnetic backup storage tapes from yesterday midnight's clean desynchronization cycle. We are executing a full disaster recovery cold start using proprietary bootstrap configuration Delta 7. On it, Damon. Nora responded instantly, sprinting toward the secure magnetic storage vault. I walked up to the biometric scanner of the primary server vault door. I pressed my thumb against the optical reader and scanned my retina. The security console chimed with a bright green light. Master Administrator access restored. Welcome, Senior Director Damon Vance. The heavy steel vault door unlatched with a loud pneumatic hiss. I stepped inside the climate-controlled server room. For the next 2 hours and 45 minutes, I operated with pure technical precision. Working alongside Nora and Gavin, I bypassed the corrupted primary boot volumes entirely. I mounted yesterday midnight's clean magnetic backup tapes onto the disaster recovery drives. Using terminal command overrides, I manually rebuilt the master partition tables, reconstructed the desynchronized encryption key indexes, and restored the corrupted database headers for all 85 million customer records. I initiated the database initialization sequence. Row upon row of high-density server racks began to hum back to life. Status indicator lights shifted systematically from dark amber to solid, bright green. At 2:45 in the afternoon, primary database clusters initialized successfully. At 3:15, secondary failover arrays locked into perfect synchronization. At 3:35, tertiary load balancers recalibrated and automated enterprise traffic channels reopened nationwide. I pulled up the primary network monitoring console on the central terminal. Millions of live data transactions per second began flowing seamlessly across our encrypted cloud pipelines once again. Hospital networks in Ohio and Pennsylvania re-established instant access to critical patient medical files. Financial institutions in New York cleared backlogged electronic payment queues. E-commerce checkout portals returned to 100% operational capacity. I executed a final system-wide diagnostic check. 85 million customer records fully restored. Zero permanent data loss. System integrity standing at 100%. Total network downtime, 3 hours and 45 minutes. Nora Davis let out a massive cheer, leaning back against the terminal console in pure triumph. Gavin Ross slammed his hand on the desk, grinning from ear to ear. "We did it," Nora laughed. "Damon, you absolute legend." I checked my watch. The time was exactly 3:45 in the afternoon. I smoothed down my navy suit jacket, picked up my briefcase, and turned to Nora and Gavin. "Excellent work, both of you," I said with a warm smile. "Now, if you will excuse me, we have an emergency board of directors meeting scheduled upstairs in conference room Alpha." I took the elevator up to the executive floor and walked into conference room Alpha. The atmosphere inside the room was stark, formal, and heavy with legal gravity. Seated at the head of the conference table was CEO Donald Price. On the wall-mounted high-definition display screens were live video feeds of board chairperson Sylvia Rothman and senior board member Winston Dacro. Seated on the left side of the table was Vice President Bradley Vance, looking pale and defeated. Chad Vance sat next to him, trembling visibly. As I entered the room, every eyes turned toward me. Senior Director Vance, Chairperson Sylvia Rothman, spoke through the video monitor, her voice clear and authoritative. "Please report system status." Chairperson Rothman, I stated, standing at the foot of the table with complete executive composure. "As of 3:45 this afternoon, Etheria Technologies' cloud security infrastructure is fully operational. All primary, secondary, and tertiary server clusters are running at 100% capacity. All 85 million customer records have been fully verified with zero permanent data loss. Enterprise client connections nationwide are fully restored." A visible wave of relief washed across the faces of Donald Price and the board members on the video screen. "Thank you, Damon," Sylvia Rothman said deeply. "You have saved this corporation from complete ruin. Now, the board of directors will address the operational and legal failures that brought Etheria to the brink of collapse." Sylvia Rothman turned her gaze sharply toward Vice President Bradley Vance and Chad Vance. "Vice President Bradley Vance," Sylvia continued, her tone turning cold as ice. "6 months ago, you utilized your apparent executive authority to create a deputy director position for your nephew, Chad Vance. You explicitly promised Senior Director Damon Vance that his mentorship of Chad would serve as the primary benchmark for his evaluation as Vice President of Technology. Under the legal doctrine of promissory estoppel, your clear verbal promises created a binding obligation that Damon relied upon to his professional detriment." Bradley Vance opened his mouth to speak, but Sylvia held up her hand, cutting him off instantly. "Do not speak, Bradley," Sylvia commanded sternly. "Instead of honoring that professional commitment, you executed an arbitrary, bad-faith demotion of a 14-year veteran who built our entire security framework. You appointed your 23-year-old nephew, who possessed zero technical qualifications, to manage infrastructure protecting 85 million records. That action constitutes a gross breach of fiduciary duty to this corporation and its shareholders." Senior board member Winston Dacro chimed in from his video screen, his voice filled with stern authority. "Bradley, your nephew's catastrophic operational negligence today resulted in 3 hours and 45 minutes of unannounced network downtime. At $115,000 per minute, direct financial losses and client SLA breach penalties exceed $26 million. Furthermore, Etheria faces severe legal exposure from enterprise clients for SLA violations. Your reckless nepotism endangered the very survival of this company." Winston Dacro paused, reviewing a legal document on his desk. "Therefore," Winston announced, "the board of directors has voted unanimously on the following binding actions. First, Chad Vance is terminated immediately, with cause, for gross operational negligence. He is barred from entering any Etheria Technologies facility permanently and will be escorted from this building by corporate security within 5 minutes. Chad Vance burst into tears, slumping forward in his chair. "Uncle Bradley, please, do something," Chad sobbed. Bradley Vance sat motionless, unable to even look at his nephew. Second, Winston Dacro continued relentlessly. Vice President Bradley Vance is stripped of all executive authority over the technology division immediately. The board of directors has initiated a formal internal audit into your executive conduct for breach of fiduciary duty. You will surrender your executive keys today and report to corporate counsel on Monday morning to negotiate your formal resignation from Etheria Technologies without severance. Third, Winston concluded, turning his attention to me, Senior Director Damon Vance is officially appointed as Executive Director of Cloud Security and Chief Technology Advisor to the Board of Directors. In addition to your 50% compensation, increase and guaranteed 3-year contract, you will assume full executive control over the technology division budget, including immediate authorization to hire 3 additional senior security engineers of your choice. Furthermore, you will immediately take possession of the corner executive office suite previously occupied by Bradley Vance. I looked at Winston Dacro, then at Sylvia Rothman, and finally at Donald Price. I accept the appointment, Chairperson Rothman, I said calmly and professionally. I assure the board that under my executive leadership, Etheria Technologies will maintain strict technical standards, flawless regulatory compliance, and total operational integrity. Meeting adjourned, Sylvia Rothman declared. 2 heavy-set corporate security officers entered conference room Alpha. They stood on either side of Chad Vance, pulled him up from his chair, and escorted the weeping 23-year-old out of the room. Bradley Vance slowly gathered his personal papers, bowed his head in shame, and walked out of the room without uttering a single word. I walked out of conference room Alpha and headed down the executive hallway to the massive corner office suite overlooking the city skyline. I opened the double doors. The evening sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished mahogany desk and executive leather chairs. I set my leather briefcase on the desk, walked over to the glass window, and looked out over the sprawling city. My cell phone chimed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text message from Claire. "How did everything turn out?" I smiled, my heart filled with warmth and quiet satisfaction, and typed back, "Everything is restored. The systems are green, the bad actors are gone, and I am coming home for dinner as Chief Technology Advisor." An hour later, I packed my briefcase, locked the executive suite doors, and walked down to the parking lot. The evening air was fresh and cool. As I drove my sedan out of the corporate campus toward home, I knew that in business, as in life, loud corporate politics and arrogant nepotism may win a momentary advantage, but true technical competence, unyielding integrity, and patient adherence to legal principles will always prevail in the end.